wait. And baby, I'm TFC till I die.
Hello and welcome back to Toronto Till I Die, Thursday edition. I'm Mike Newell, and it's been a week. The boys have been away, some of them on international duty, flying and playing for their respective countries, but your Reds return to action this Saturday against Chicago Fire. Lots to talk about. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about the upcoming game. This is a TTID Who Are You mashup show. You guys have really loved them in the past, so we're bringing that back today. We'll also talk a little bit about the Canadian men's national team and their international journey the last week. They went on a little Euro trip. So we're going to talk a little bit about how they did as well. Lots to get into, but bringing in my co-host, your friend and mine, Mr. Michael Singh. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
Good, man. I feel like it's been a minute since I've hopped on here. I feel like, I know we've been off for a week, or TFC has been off for a week, but I feel like a million things have happened and transpired since I last spoke. So honestly, just really happy to get back in here, and I've been itching to talk some TFC and share my thoughts with everybody. I've missed you guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the people have missed you too. And look, we get it all the time. Where's Mike Singh? Where's Mike Singh? So here he is, ladies and gentlemen.
It's true. They have to listen to you and Jeff. So
I know. Well, that's listen to Jeff.
Me,
they like listening to me.
Yeah.
They like the dulcet tones that I bring to the show. Look, it's a lot has happened obviously in TFC land, and we'll get to that in a second. Really briefly want to touch on the Canadian men's national team and their Euro trip, these two games, these friendlies that Jesse Marsch has had to step right into. What an introduction. You get hired like a month and a bit ago, and then here's your first test. Congratulations, you get the Netherlands and France to start, and you'll also get Argentina to start a massive tournament for our nation. So welcome aboard, Jesse Marsch. I think most of you are listening and watching here. You'll know the results. A 4-0 loss to the Netherlands, and a 0-0 draw against France. Two different performances from the national team, and two kind of different looks. Maybe not looks. Maybe just more approaches to games that we saw for the Canadian men's national team. But, before I sort of jump in with my thoughts, Mike, wanted to just sort of get your thoughts initially on sort of, because we didn't really get to talk to you about the hiring of Jesse Marsch. That was one of the shows you were away, and Jeff and I waxed poetic for quite a long time on his hiring. But wanted to get your thoughts, first of all, on Jesse Marsch as the Canadian men's national team manager, and then the first two results in the team that he called up for these friendlies.
Yeah, I like the Jesse Marsch hiring. I think it was a guy who understands the Canadian soccer and North American soccer ecosystem, obviously very familiar with Major League Soccer, and has experience also on the global stage, right? Things might not have gone to plan for him in his most recent gig at Leeds, but you watch that Leeds team, it was still a side that worked its tail off, a side that was, energetic, competitive in every match, and had a few bounces gone their way. It would have been more promising, I would say, for Leeds and his stint with that team. I liked what he tried to do there. Obviously, bringing in a lot of Americans into that side and really, playing on the front foot, being confident, being bold, and that's kind of what I think he wants to do with Canada. Canada in a kind of a similar way has a lot of dynamic players and a lot of players, obviously Alphonso Davies being, the biggest name. They have players that I think on the world stage can go out there and, take it to teams and run at teams and press relentlessly like we saw, especially in that first half against Netherlands. I think that's kind of the style of game that Jesse Marsch wants to implement, and Canada has the players to play that style. I think there is a nice marriage there when it comes to Obviously his experience, like I touched on, but B, his playing style. I think it very much suits Canada where they are today. They look when you go against teams like Netherlands, like France, Argentina coming up, Canada's not going to be the team that dominates the ball, right? They're
Yeah.
going to have to, although, funny enough, they played almost 50-50 possession against France. So I do, give Jesse Marsh credit for that. I was surprised by how well Canada did play with the ball, but they're also a team that's going to make its living on pressing and counterattacking and, you know, capitalizing on turnovers in dangerous areas of the pitch. So again, overall, I think I like the Jesse Marsh signing.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I admittedly at the time was not overwhelmed by it, or let maybe say I was underwhelmed by the signing initially. Um, but I do see the starting points, right, that are there for a potential successful run, right? Like the players can play the system. I think against the Netherlands, at least in the first half, you saw a team that could cause, higher, quote unquote, higher ranked teams problems, right? That aggressive pressing style, that ability to run all over the park, that ability to close down space really quickly and sort of make life difficult for teams and turn the ball over in dangerous areas where your danger players can get onto the ball and make things happen. Obviously the difference in step up in quality is that those teams can figure their way out of those things a lot quicker than probably the majority of the opponents you'll play in CONCACAF, right? And
Yeah.
that's essentially what the Dutch did is they, one, adjusted into, I think the levels dropped a little bit in the second half, fitness being part of it, and also
Definitely.
like there were the goals really started raining in once the change, some substitutions were made, and some players were sort of still figuring out their way through the system. And then, you roll into the France game, and look, you have some people commenting saying France kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit, weren't necessarily, getting themselves out of, second gear. You don't have Kylian Mbappe to start the match. Okay, fine. That's still, even without a Kylian Mbappe that team, that's probably still the best or second best team on the planet right now, right?
Yeah.
In terms of form and in terms of just overall skill. And I think you do really well against them. Like, I think you show a little bit of a different look to them, and you're able to possess the ball a little bit more, and you're able to put yourselves into some dangerous spots. Of course, France are going to have their chances, and arguably you could say that they probably should have scored a goal, but Max Grippo, I think made a very strong case to be the number one going into Copa America, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, and look, a lot of people have been raving about Ishmael Kone and his performance in that
Oh
game,
yeah.
and he
It was
was
a ball.
fantastic. I mean, the deep progressions from him were
It was
amazing.
unbelievable.
He was unbelievable. In a lot of ways, he made an outplayed Camavinga, right? Which is it's a pretty high praise, I was really impressed by Derek Cornelius in that match, actually.
Yeah.
I really liked the way he played. I really liked the way he stepped to things. I loved his distribution out of the back, actually. I thought he was pretty good with his distribution. I think that's something Canada has needed from the back line. I don't know if he's the long-term answer back there, but for right now, with him and Bombito playing the way they're playing, maybe this is a center back pairing you can go into a lot of games being confident that you're going to be able to see out some results.
Yeah, and that's such a big thing about, Jesse Marsh coming in and giving opportunities to, different players that maybe in the past, while they might have got a look here or there, they were never able to, step up and displace some of the veterans on the squad. So, start of the previous window with Mauro Biello still in charge, we saw a lot of the, you know, quote unquote old guard of the team get cut and dropped from the
Yeah.
side, open the door for some opportunities. And then, yeah, where do we talk about the biggest change is definitely going to be in that back line with Bombito and now Derek Cornelius. And I agree with you. Yeah, two guys that, didn't really look out of place too much. Cornelius, he definitely can pick a pass. Absolutely. There are times I feel like, yeah, sure, he's a bit too aggressive in his decision making where an easy pass is available, but he decides to take risks. And it's fine. It's gonna happen when you take risks. Sometimes it's not gonna work out. But yeah, I wasn't sure what we really had in Derek Cornelius overall, right? And now I think, you walk away from that saying, that's our starting center back pair. So I think, Jesse Marsh deserves, some credit for doing this. Maybe some could argue it's probably the obvious play, given the way that Bombitos played in Major League Soccer, his athleticism as well to really, cover some ground. And obviously the way Cornelius has played this year, probably pretty obvious, but still, dropping Kamal Miller, who was, kind of been in and out of the national team the last couple windows when it comes to the starting 11, but still a guy who's really a mainstay under John Herman for the most part, still is a decision that you have to make. So that part's fine with me. Netherlands first half, brilliant, right? One of the best encouraging halves of football you'll see. Second half, I agree with you, completely faded out. It almost was like the workload that was being asked by Jesse Marsh, the demands, went right to Canada's legs in the first half, but really people were exhausted by the second half, it felt like. And a goal goes in. In a way, it's almost demoralizing after you defend so well. And it's tough to get back against a team like the Netherlands who can absolutely pounce on you when they smell a little bit of blood, which is what happened. The second game against France, Canada had every excuse really to come away from that game and or come into that game and kind of not really be as up for it, right? It's a more intimidating side. You just got your butt kicked 4-0 by Netherlands, who are a decent team, very good team, but I think France is probably a different level. But yeah, Canada come out with even more intensity. Same 11 essentially, except for Crepeau. And throughout the course of the game, while there were moments in France didn't capitalize, and France wasn't an urgent France. Like they were very much, it was a friendly and it showed for France, whereas Canada were treating it like the World Cup final. Um, Still, you're able to get that result. And I think that's a massive result for Jesse Marsh heading into the Copa America, because there's real belief now with the nation. And funny enough, like Canada has this, at least at the last World Cup heading into it, they had this DNA, right? This us against everybody kind of mentality. This, nobody really knows who we are, but we're going to, we're better than a lot of people think, kind of thing. And we're going to, catch people by surprise. I feel like a little bit of that swagger's back now heading into Argentina. And that's why even getting these games as a whole leading up to the tournament, like if you were going to go out there and get a window and you're going to play, Haiti again, and you're going to play whoever it might be, you're not getting that same kind of feeling coming away from it. So, tip my hat to Canada Soccer for being able to facilitate these as well.
Yeah, and look, part of this was using the 80th anniversary of D-Day to facilitate some of this. And look, absolutely, look, if you have that opportunity, one, to mark such a special occasion, but also, able to get those games in, that's incredible, right? And then now you look forward to Copa America, and your opening game is against the number one FIFA ranked team in the world in Argentina. And obviously we know who is awaiting in that match. But you go into that with a little bit more confidence, in the sense that, look, you're not going to stop Messi, but if you can, keep some level of control in the game, you keep yourself, I think you can legitimately keep yourself in that match against Argentina, right? Like, obviously, the one thing is you don't want to maybe go in sort of the way you did first half against the Netherlands, because you may get picked apart. But if you can find a certain level between sort of the first half of that game against the Dutch and your performance against France, then you're in it, right? And then you hope, Kyle Larin, Jonathan David, up top. Arguably, Jonathan David should have at least either scored a goal or at least slipped one off to Stefan Eustachio in the second half to score. And then you see where you are at that point, right? And, if you can come away with a result against Argentina, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if you can come away with a result against Argentina, then that whole group kind of opens up for an opportunity, right, to potentially progress to the next round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can do a full show on Canada. But it was actually, from a Canada perspective, it was nice to see Richie Laryea back on the field. And of course, Ozo made
Get an opportunity out there, yeah.
Yeah, got some minutes too. against France. Like that is again just such a cool moment, but another notch on their belt. Like they can go, you know, to Argentina, to the Copa America, or to the States there, and feel, you know, not in awe as much anymore. And I think that part's super important.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll have a little bit more of a preview on that closer to the first game for Canada, but we're going to transition into a little TFC talk here. A lot happening for your Reds over the last little bit. Obviously, the international break, no games last weekend, though MLS did play games, but your Reds still sit in 6th in the Eastern Conference. After that, couple of big notes. Obviously, the big one, I think, just from a team building perspective, is Sean Johnson contract extension. Another year on the deal up to 2026 now. So no more speculating on, are they going to use him as trade bait? Right now, doesn't seem to be the case. He's the guy, and I think it's an important contract extension. I don't think it's going to be the one that is the sexiest, obviously. But it's one that shows a good sign that, you have a leadership core, and he's an incredibly important piece to that. And clearly TFC saw a need to sort of get a deal done now, to keep him part of the club for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible signing, because he's still, in my opinion, one of the best goalies in Major League Soccer. So there's the on-field part to it, right? As good as Luka Gavrin has been, I still think Sean Johnson is another level ahead of him. The other part to it, and I think this speaks volume, is kind of where the club is at today. Had Tirana FC begin to have these discussions with Sean Johnson at the end of last season, I don't think there's a chance in hell that Sean Johnson is willing to re-sign that contract. Tells you kind of where things are behind the scenes as well. Like Sean Johnson is willing to. This is a guy that really, on almost every team in the league, had a blank check towards the starting number one role, at least from that regard. And then, yes, you're going to get, rewarded fairly handsomely when it comes to his compensation. Still, we talked about it last season when it comes to like valuable contracts. Sean Johnson was the one guy that you could confidently say, Kobe Franklin as well, Alonzo Cuello, sure. But the one guy you can confidently say that was like a veteran that was making, was worth what he was paid was Sean Johnson last year. So the ability to extend him, it's such a terrific move and such a big win. Very interested to see what that number comes in at. Anything around the same number, I'm happy with. If it's lower, even better. But if you're bringing Sean Johnson back around the same number, that's a win for the club.
Yeah, absolutely. You're getting a undisputed number one in this league, right? And you're also getting, like I said, I think beyond just the shot stopping capabilities, that leadership aspect to it is critical, right? And a major part of turning around what we, this time last year were just lamenting, right? And being able to be a part of that and turn that around is key. And clearly that is felt in the front office, because I like you said, I don't think even maybe coming even into January, going into training camp, maybe if you try to start or really seriously go into contract extensions, then I'm sure conversations were being had at that point. But really sort of going out with a concrete offer at that time, I don't know if he re-signs it, or at least he takes a pause, right? And thinks,
100%.
right, before it's like, okay, dude, is this how I really want to, I'm not saying he's anywhere near done in terms of his career, but he's 35. He's not, he's got less years left than he has forward, right? So, from that perspective, he's gonna have to take a look. And clearly, the fact that I think there's a structure with John Herdman, there's clearly trust built with the coaching staff and with the players on the team right now. And obviously there's some trust with the front office currently, right? That there's enough trust and enough sort of belief in what the plan is in terms of how they're building out this squad, that he's comfortable to commit his future until essentially the end of the World Cup, which he's still trying to get to, right? He's still trying to get to 2026, right? And go to the World Cup with the U.S. So, and he's currently on the U.S. squad for Copa America. So, I mean, that's, again, big win for TFC.
Yeah, and also very much helps that he loves the city too. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that played a role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Other notes: Lorenzo Insigne is back. He's had his third child. So congratulations to Lorenzo and his family. Will play on Saturday, but again, in the revolving chair of DPS, we will not have Federico Bernardeschi playing. He is suspended on a red card suspension, but 2 yellows in that DC game. We talked enough about that in the last show. So I don't think we need to sort of lament that. But I think it'll be interesting because again, this is a player that was on really good, frankly, form before he got injured, and the question becomes how quickly can he sort of get back up to speed in that regard? Because TFC are going to need him, really to produce. Because look, they're 6th in the East and the vibes are good, but this team only has 1 win in the last 6. Right, so it's how quickly can your star man get back up to speed heading into essentially a critical stretch going into the League's Cup.
Yeah, some tough or drop points felt like losses in a way along that stretch. So I've always said this, right? TFC this weekend are going to be missing corner John Molinaro, Jonathan Osorio, and Richie Larea, Sean Johnson. All 3 of those guys are not going to be part of the squad as they're away, obviously with Copa America. Federico Bernardeschi is suspended. Nixon Gomes suspended, right? These are all 5 of those guys are really, they've established themselves as core starters on this team. So they're heading into Chicago, who, yeah, sure, they're going to be missing, maybe a few guys, Chicago's heading to BMO Field. They're going to be missing a few guys, but still, it's not a given by any means that this is 3 points. So I circle this game from a Toronto FC fan perspective as I say this a lot, but this is a game they've got to pick up 3 points when you're looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at a team in Chicago, and we're going to get into who you are in a few minutes here. But you're looking at a team in Chicago. It's 14th in the Eastern Conference. If you followed this league for a while, Chicago's kind of playing like Chicago in a way. Even though they made some really big signings, and we'll get into that when we start talking about who are you. But in a lot of ways, yeah, from a home perspective, it is a must kind of win game, right? Like you really do need to get maximum points here. In order to kind of, to just keep yourself in that. You don't really want to start falling into that, 7, 8, 9 sort of category, right? Once you start getting there, it gets dicey. You start having to rely on other teams a lot more than you really want to. And this is kind of where TFC ended up at the end of 2022, where, of course, look, you ended up losing the last 5 games, so that sealed their fate. But even before that, when they were starting to make a little bit of a run when the DPs first showed up, you're in a hole so much that you have to rely on other teams to drop points. And yes, it's still early, but I mean, you now have to really start thinking about that positioning in the table, even though it's before Leagues Cup. Once Leagues Cup comes around, it eats up a month, and then essentially you come back in August, and you've really got August, September, and a tiny bit of October to try to either make up points or solidify your position. So from that perspective, it actually, this stretch going into Leagues Cup is actually going to be quite important for TFC, and you're not going to have, 3 of your top players due to international duty.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. And I've always said this, TFC moving forward has the hardest schedule of Major League Soccer. So, games like these, they do really matter in the grand scheme of things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we bring in our guest, wanted to get your thoughts. Jeff and I had this conversation before, but just your thoughts on the second half of the season. You kind of alluded to it. Obviously, it's going to be a tough run in to the end of the season, but we're kind of like at the halfway point of the season. So what are your sort of thoughts on the second half of the season? Like, what do you think are going to be the key priorities for TFC in sort of the stretch run here?
Yeah, it's a good question. Knowing John Herman, the way that he operates, the goals are set incredibly high for Toronto FC, right? Uh, TFC are in sixth, and that is with Lorenzo Insigne missing the majority of the season. It feels like, right? It's I can count the number of times Insigne and Bernardeschi have played together this year on one hand. It's with Richie Larea missing the entire year except for the opener, the season opener, right? It's a team that has definitely battled significant injuries and absences and are still here in six. So, when it comes to priorities, it's A, seeing what this team looks like. We won't get that potentially for a little bit, but seeing what this team looks like when all of its parts are humming, all of its parts are in place, or at least the majority of its parts, right? The last glimpse we really got of that was what, against Montreal?
Yeah.
And, that was that was a heck of a game. So, Jason Hernandez has to see that, has to evaluate that. And, step two is really adding to this team now. I think coming into the year, and John Herman might have been even been on the same page. It was still a rebuilding year when it came to the roster, but now it seems like everyone has settled into these roles. TFC have made terrific signings. Every one of these signings has played an impact on this roster, and we have I would say, a solid foundation, a solid core now. So now for Jason Hernandez and company and John Herdman and everyone else behind the scenes, Sean Rubio, it's now evaluating where you need to add to this core. Do you go out and do you need to find a striker? Do we need more competition? Prince Owosu, is Prince Owosu the guy? That's where I'd start. How solid is this team defensively? Do they need to go out and add a starting right center back? Right? How does this team line up when everyone's healthy? These are the kind of questions you kind of got to think about. So for me, it's a continue to obviously maintain that playoff spot when everyone gets back. It's taking that next level and then adding to this core. So I would say an ambitious summer for Toronto FC.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let's chat a little bit about the first step to that ambitious summer. We're going to transition to an episode of Who Are You? So welcome to the latest episode of Who Are You? This is a show where we bring in guests, talk a little bit about our opponents, and I'm happy to welcome in Alex Campbell from the CHGO Fire Podcast. Alex, thanks for joining, man. Thanks for chatting a little bit with us about the Fire. And yeah, it's, one of the things that we always sort of talk about when we bring on guests for the show is, we talk a little bit about the form leading into the show, right? And right now the Fire sit 14th in the East. But they're unbeaten in their last three, and a surprise 2-1 win against the LA Galaxy prior to the international break. So wanted to get your sense of sort of how the season has gone so far for the Fire. We see them a lot during the season, usually during MLS season, but this is the first time we'll be seeing this version of the Fire in 2024.
First off, guys, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. Looking forward to this weekend. Well, you haven't missed much because this Fire team looks a whole lot like the last 3 years of Fire teams. It is a strangely assembled squad that somehow is less than the sum of its parts. It's questions about coaching and signings and all sorts of things. It is, questions about Xherdan Shaqiri and his role or lack thereof in how things are going. It's waiting for some young players to break out. Yeah, it's been a lot of the same. But I think there's a lot of optimism. You mentioned unbeaten in the last three. There's been a lot of things that have been different about these last three games, and we can get into those. But it feels like, I don't want to say the team has turned a corner, but it seems like for the first time all season, the team is pointed in a discernible direction. After the first third of the season, it seemed like there was very little direction of any kind.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit because obviously this offseason, some bold moves acquiring Andrew Gutman, Ali Selassie's deal became permanent, signing really arguably the biggest midfield attacking free agent in Kellen Acosta. And of course, the club's record signing Hugo Capir is there. Sorry if I butchered that name though. On paper, at least, like there's talent on this roster, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what went wrong the first half of the season, and then what are some of the things that you kind of touched on that you feel why you feel this team has perhaps started to turn a corner?
So, I mean, the biggest issue for the Fire last year was their inability to create chances. It was then compounded by the fact that the few chances they did create, they had strikers who were all finishing below expected goal value. I mean, you had Kai Kamara and Kasper Shabilko with a combined age of over 70 last year, both getting a lot of minutes. So that wasn't great. And yeah, there was just no chance creation, and that has largely continued this season. You talk about Hugo Kuipers coming in at $15 million. He's only getting 2 or 3 touches in the box a game, and that's just not going to cut it. He's got 5 goals on the season, which is right about his expected goals so far this year. So it's not like he's getting chances and not taking them. He's just not getting chances, period. So that was a big problem. Injuries have played a big role. You mentioned Andrew Gutman, a homecoming of sorts for him, suburban Chicago native. Lots of excitement, comes in and tears or hyperextends or pulls or does something to his hamstring 3 minutes into the season opener in Philadelphia. Comes back, plays 8 games, just got hurt again 2 weeks ago. So that's really been too bad. And then defensively, there's just been other issues. Rafa Shihos, who's been the captain for the last 2 years, vacated that captaincy early in this season. The Fire have now played, I believe, 4 different starting captains this season on the year. He has just taken a step back. He's not looked like the player he has been, although at, I believe, now 34 years old. That's not incredibly surprising. And then there was no consistency in a partner for him. Carlos Turan is talented but unreliable, both in terms of staying on the field, in terms of discipline and injury. Tobias Sahlquist, a Danish center back who the Fire have liked a lot for a while, comes in, and not long after it looked like he had gotten acclimated, he suffered a pretty serious leg injury a few weeks ago with no timetable for his return. So that's been tough as well. So yeah, defensive issues, lack of chance creation. As for what's changed, so these last 3 games have a few things in common. One, none of them have involved Xherdan Shaqiri. He was allowed to leave 10 days early for pre-Euro Switzerland camp.
Might be a little bit of a sign.
Yeah. That was apparently a mutual decision. He had an interview today over in Switzerland where he appeared to criticize some of the decisions that Georg Heitz, the sporting director, has made, which is extremely ironic given that he is the one saying such a thing. Certainly hinted that he seems to want to go home. That is, I think, everyone's preference at this point. I believe he has played his last minute for the Fire. I think that's going to be that. So he has been gone. That's been the one big change. The second big change is after just playing the most boring 4-2-3-1 with no discernible tactics all season, the Fire have changed their tactics up quite a bit. They're playing out of, I guess, what I would call a 3-5-2. Again, that's given them a little more defensive solidity. It's also allowed Brian Gutierrez to play in a position where he seems to have a lot of freedom. His best position is centrally behind a striker, where he's not been able to get a lot of reps because of Shaqiri. And now these last 3 games, we've seen him play as, on paper, one of 2 number 8s in that 3-5-2. But really, he is licensed to go anywhere. And there's plenty of debate about how high his ceiling is, what level of player he can ultimately be. But this team certainly runs better at the moment when Gutierrez is the guy who has the keys. Now, it's expected the Fire are going to go out and spend more money this summer. If Shaqiri leaves, that's an open DP spot. Gaston Jimenez's contract is currently designated player in name only and can easily be bought back down. So there is the expectation the Fire will bring in 1, if not 2, designated players this summer. So I think if you're Brian Gutierrez, you're kind of currently fighting to prove that you don't need to be upgraded in that chief creator role, but the Fire just need somebody besides Kuipers or Guti who can be an offensive impact. Right now, there's this ongoing search for who partners Kuipers in that front 2. They tried Tom Barlow. That went really poorly. He's looked all out of sorts since joining in the offseason. Yurios Koutsias, Greek under-21 striker, has gotten some minutes there. Seems, though, to be best as maybe an off-the-bench, run-like-hell sort of guy. He's still very much – he's still a teenager. So he's still very much in his kind of like baby giraffe stage of his
Still
career.
trying to figure out his new legs.
Yeah, there's lots of athleticism there, but it doesn't quite all work yet. And then last game, Michael, you mentioned him, Marin Haile Selassie, whose deal was made permanent after being on loan from Lugano last year. We saw him in that role this past game, and often it ended up more as almost like a 3-4-3 of sorts, with Haile Selassie and Guti both given a lot of freedom behind Kuipers. So it's an evolving situation. It feels like Shaqiri's exit has allowed everybody to relax and exhale just a little bit. And now, you guys before I came on said, on paper, and you're not wrong about this, that, if you're TFC home against the Fire, a consistent bottom feeder for years, that should be a game you got to get 3 points. But the Fire probably are thinking similarly. You noted all the absences this Toronto team has this weekend, and the fact that the Fire are playing a little bit better. Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that you guys kind of said, Toronto in 6th in the table. That's nice and all, but it doesn't feel secure given how fluid MLS is. So apologies for going so long in this answer to question number 1, but no, I think it's an interesting time for these teams to be matching up. And from the Fire's perspective, they're hoping they are catching TFC at just the wrong week for Toronto.
Well, it's funny. You might, look, I think there's a lot of optimism right now in the fan base here in Toronto, in terms of just thinking about how this team has been playing and the results. But like we said before you came on, 1-6 in terms of wins, right? So there is a little bit of I don't say it's shaky. It's more sort of like you're on somewhat of a solid ground, but there's a little bit of sand starting to trickle, and you're trying to solidify a little bit of that time, and that's why I think this game is so pivotal for TFC. Mike, you had a question about Xherdan Shaqiri, actually. So it seems like it's a good time to ask it since we just went through so much just talking about him.
Yeah, totally. Revisiting Shaqiri there. I'm curious. So today, obviously, as you mentioned, it comes out publicly where he says, "I want to go back to Europe." Right? I think that was inevitable that was going to transpire here. But earlier this year, he's sporting the armband, I believe, for the Fire. Like, what the heck went wrong? Like, is it just like did he run out of patience with this team? Like, why did it not work? I guess overall with a guy like Shaqiri, was he not the right player?
I think in hindsight, I was actually talking with some people about this today. If you go back to when this signing was made, I don't think you can argue too much with the signing of Shaqiri himself. You can, I think, argue about the price. He was basically not playing at Lyon, so $7 million transfer plus $8.5 million a year in wages is probably overpaying. But the counter is, because of designated player rules in MLS, it literally doesn't matter in terms of your roster construction. So it's kind of just gravy at that point. So I think the signing at the time made a lot of sense. The concern, though, at the time, and this is borne out to be true, is the last time he was expected to be the guy driving a team's attack was that laughable Stoke City team years ago. That was the last time he was an every game starter for a team, because then he made the career choice, and I don't begrudge him for this at all. I don't think anybody would. He decided to be a role player, a squad player on some very big, very good teams. And he got paid very well for doing that. He won some of the biggest trophies in the world doing that. So again, I don't begrudge him at all, but then he ends up at Lyon. That doesn't work out. And it's been a similar story in Chicago. Again, just no help around him is part of it. The other thing is he just doesn't run. So, you either... both with the ball, you need guys who are going to make runs. You need guys who are going to get in behind. And without the ball, you need to cover for the fact that he is a complete defensive passenger. And that's really, really hard to do. As for this year, my opinion, and there's plenty of other people who share this, is that knowing he was going to probably ease off the gas even more ahead of the Euros, him being awarded the captaincy, I think was... in no small part, a motivator, put him in a position of leadership, a situation where, tried to get the most out of him. And maybe part of that is putting him in a leadership position. And that just really didn't pan out. Again, it's still not clear why Shihos stepped aside from the captaincy. That's been a bit of a cloudy subject that plenty of people tried to ask about that we didn't really ever get an answer to. But Right now, it looks like Fabian Herbers is the team's captain when he is on the field. Kellen Acosta being the other guy we've seen with the armband in recent weeks. And those guys, I think, are both good fits for that. And yeah, I think ultimately Shaqiri, I don't know if he ran out of patience. I don't know exactly what we would say the problem is there. But what's been true for a long time, and everybody knew this when they signed him, this has been very eyes wide open for everyone. Switzerland is his priority. It's been the story of his entire career. He plays his best soccer by far in a Swiss shirt. I mean, anybody who watched the 2014 World Cup can remember that bicycle kick he had. He's, he in international tournaments, the guy looks like one of the 20 best players in the world. And at club level, he's never been that guy. So this is his last Euros. He wants to go back to Europe. It sounds like he would like to go back to Basel. That would require them paying some sort of money, though, to make it happen. I don't think he probably wants anything more, it sounds like, to do with the Fire organization. So he might not be particularly interested in his contract being bought out so he can go to Lugano. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. But yeah, it seemed like a decent shot at the time. And it would be a decision that would have gone better if the other signings that were made in his first 2 years were not so poor. By the time we got to this offseason, it was just too late.
Yeah, and again, that's interesting because in a lot of ways, I think last season for TFC, people were kind of trying to compare this Jordan Shaqiri situation to like Lorenzo Insigne a little bit, to Federico Bernardeschi, in terms of these guys in the moment seem like the right guys to go sign. They're available, they're on freeze. Why not go for it? Mm-hmm. Everything seemed to go wrong last year. Now that seems to be changing. With a change in manager and sort of a change in sort of front office philosophy a bit. But I wonder, obviously going through the amount of coaches that the Fire have now, settling back on Frank Lopez, which is just, to me, very interesting, to sort of come back to Lopez. It just seems like this just, in the end, it looked like it could have been a great fit, as you said, and that it just didn't quite, you just never got the pieces around him to kind of make it all work.
Yeah, it's that. And you mentioned, bringing back Frank Klopas, a decision that's been panned by basically everybody, from people who are close around this team to national MLS voices. Everybody kind of had a similar reaction, although the bigger reaction was the extension of Georg Heitz and Sebastian Pelzer, the sporting director and the technical director, over the last offseason. Not a single person understands what the thinking was there. The biggest conclusion we can draw is that Fire owner Joe Mansueto seems to really value loyalty and really value, personal relationships. And, he's said as much that, he gets along with Heitz very well. Everybody likes Frank Klopas as a guy. I mean, Frank is, he's a club legend. He's just one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. He's a really selfless guy. Like, as a person, you won't find anybody with anything bad to say about Frank Klopas. But ultimately, bringing back Heitz and bringing back Klopas in the offseason sent the message that the team wasn't interested in contending, in actually getting better, even though the signings seem to say that. Kuipers, Acosta, etc. If you're Shaqiri or anybody else, I don't know how you can say that you think that, the team is trying to get, a lot better at that point. And Shaqiri making Snyder marks like today is actually not new. This goes back to late last season when the Fire played a Messi-less Miami and beat them handily in the best game Shaqiri's played for the club and the best game the Fire have played in years. He made a comment afterward. It's like, well, designated players are very important. You have to get those signings right. He said it with kind of a smile and, very tongue in cheek of everybody kind of knows what's going on there. And so, yeah, I think there's just a lot of questions now. Frank Klopas has now lasted longer than Ezra Hendrickson did. He's lasted longer than Rafael Vicky did. He has not done, meaningfully better than either of those guys in terms of the results on the field. And so, yeah, I think the Fire just go into this unknown. The expectation, like I said, is more signings this summer. But obviously the Fire's transfer record has been mixed at best. And so, the question is, does it matter who you sign? if the coaching staff and the technical staff don't change. And so, the Fire coming up on an off season in, at the end of 2024, where there's going to be a lot of roster flexibility. They have a lot of contracts up at the end of this season. And so it will be an opportunity for pretty meaningful change. But the question is, will that change come, and who will be making those decisions? I am curious, though, briefly. I know I'm mostly here to answer your guys' questions. Lorenzo Insigne, as an outsider, it has been an enigma what his situation is. Obviously, Bernadeschi's had a much better season, seems to be more engaged. But is Insigne, is it simply that his body has kind of failed him over the last year plus, and everybody's just kind of hoping he can string together enough games to play himself into some sort of form?
It's a good question. Mike, what do you think?
Definitely a factor. Injury prone. That label is fair to say. When he's on the field, in my opinion, it's magical. Right? He is incredibly talented. More motivated this year than it was last year. He seems to have found a next step under John Herman. For various reasons, he's been on and off the field. So yeah, I think I think there is potential that he maybe never lives up to that, $15 million a year price tag, but he can be on his day the second best player in Major League Soccer. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think this year too, with that found motivation, he's been a game winner. Like, let's be real. Like the first sort of 4 or 5 matches of the season before he got hurt, like in many ways, he literally won us 3 points where maybe we should have had a draw, right? So that is the sort of the draw and allure of him, is that he's injured a lot, but when he gets healthy, like you're going to see on Saturday, like he's healthy again and he's going to play, and then you go feel like, well, he's healthy now, and if he can just get a run of games, then TFC should go like this, and you get him and Bernadeschi going, and once, but again, you're missing some of your key Canadian internationals that are gone. Sean Johnson's gone with the U.S. national team. It's not even just Lorenzo Insigne. Like, obviously that is the draw because he's a DP and he makes a lot of money. But this team just hasn't really been able to get its best 11 on a pitch at the same time for any extended period of time, maybe since late 2022. And that is kind of the frustrating part of it I think for TFC fans. It's just that we kind of want to say, like, okay, he comes on at a certain point and doesn't maybe play well or plays well, but when we don't really know how it all fits with the whole team because we haven't seen the whole thing all together all at once for any extended run of time.
Yeah, and to be fair though, that narrative has shifted this year when it comes to Insigne. At the end of last season, everyone was ready to buy him his plane ticket, ourselves included, and send him back to Italy because, some of that frustration that you see from Shaqiri, coming out of media, coming out on the field at times, that was very much Lorenzo Insigne. So like when you described in Shaqiri was pretty similar to, I think, how a lot of fans felt about Lorenzo Insigne. However, under John Herman, he's been able to kind of right the ship in a big way. As Mike said, every time he's been on the field, he's been the difference maker for Toronto FC. The last time he featured in a match a couple weeks ago, it was a 4-3 loss to FC Cincinnati, but Lorenzo Insigne willed them to that result, a very, very, very close game. So he is right now this season so far living up to that DP tag, with the exception that he can't stay on the field. Now, mind you, the last absent was because his wife had a baby. So we're talking like 2 or 3 games that he missed because of that. But, hopefully things are behind him, knock on wood, because it really is a treat, not just for Toronto FC fans, but I think Major League Soccer as a whole to get the best out of Lorenzo Insigne. Alex, let me throw. Sorry, Mike, do you have something?
No, go ahead.
Okay, let me throw it back to you because I'm super curious. Mike was going to allude to this in one of his questions, but Chicago is a incredibly rich sports city, right? Historic, right? Cubs, White Sox, Bears, obviously, Blackhawks, you name it. the Chicago Fire moving to downtown,
Mhm.
right? Last year, even though the club hasn't made the playoffs in I think 6 years,
Yeah,
roughly,
2017. So yeah, it's been 7 full seasons now without playoffs. It will be 8 if they don't make it this season.
right? Despite that, they had record attendance last year. So, how is the Fire, I guess, perceived in the Chicago sports, landscape?
I guess the short answer is they're not. I mean, and I think when if you want to just bring Chicago soccer in general, the different struggles the Fire and the Red Stars have, I think, can illustrate a lot about, because neither one is perceived much, and the way they've gotten to that point is very different. I regularly get comments whether we're doing live CHGO podcasts and somebody just stumbles in, or on Twitter, of people thinking that the Chicago Sting are still Chicago's soccer team, which is relevant because the NASL is magically back in the news. Which, of course, they said that league simply will not die, apparently, even if it only exists in legal documents. No, the Fire simply aren't perceived. If you wind back the clock when they first came into the league in the 90s, they were good immediately. I mean, they were to be fair, they are the first expansion team in MLS history, coming into the league only a couple years after it formed, but they were immediately good. That was Bob Bradley's transition from Princeton to the professional ranks. He kind of walked out of college soccer, walked into MLS, and just immediately dominated. So you had those early years of winning that built a lot of goodwill. They were playing at Soldier Field. Obviously, the idea of a soccer-specific stadium didn't even exist in 1998. So they were really good there. And then the next thing they did, even though they weren't as good, is they brought in Cuauhtemoc Blanco, Mexican legend, obviously in a city full of Mexican immigrants with a really strong just Latino community, soccer-loving community in general. Didn't matter if the team was good or not. He put butts in seats because people wanted to come see him play. He was still playing for Mexico when he joined the Fire. That was not true by the time he left, but again, that was a huge draw. And then the team moved to Bridgeview. And while some people kind of look at Bridgeview as the entire problem, I don't know if that's the case, because the Fire showed in 2017, if you win, people will show up. That's the best, that's the most fun season in the last 15 years for this team, was that 2017 team that was the best team in MLS for a period of that season before injuries and regression to the mean caught up with them. So yeah, now they are back at Soldier Field. They do really, really well when it comes to corporate and hospitality stuff. I mean, there are the benefits of playing at Soldier Field in the city, and your owner being a guy who has been very active in the Chicago business community for 30 years, knows everybody, has, built up just a lot of goodwill generally. And the other thing is, basically everything about this team has gotten remarkably better since Mansueto bought the team, except the first team on the field. Like the academy investment has gone up, and those teams are performing well. I guess what you would call the marketing revenue, the commercial revenue has gone way up. They're opening a new club headquarters and training facility downtown on the near southwest side. Fields opening later this summer, team moving in, January 1st, 2025 is the hope. So there's been all these other things that are moving positively, and then you're left with the soccer not being very good. You talk about Chicago as a historic sports town, and it is. We've got a lot of bad teams right now, just generally speaking. We've got a few mediocre teams, but mostly we have bad teams. And even the Cubs now, and this was shown a couple years ago, we're in an age now where no one can simply draw fans by existing. You have to give except the Bears. The NFL is, of course, its own thing. And the Bears also play in the smallest stadium in the NFL in the third biggest city in the country. So it would be pretty shameful for them not to sell it out. So with the exception of the Bears, and to some extent the Cubs, if you want people in the seats, you need to win. And, the Fire aren't winning. So they've proven, to your point, they can get okay numbers through the door. They can average 14, 15,000 a game over the course of the season. But if they ever want to go above that, the team is going to need to get better. And there's a lot of big decisions coming up in the next couple of years. Obviously, the Bears are trying to get out of the current Soldier Field, and the question is, what does that mean for the Fire? There's a big story in Chicago sports and Chicago soccer this week of that the city of Bridgeview, where the Fire play sometimes and train always, and where the Red Stars play, is having a music festival on the site, on the stadium site, on the same weekend the Red Stars have a home game. And it's also going to probably require not only the Red Stars, but the Fire and a local rugby team to all move out for their general business and training purposes for a couple weeks ahead of time. So there's probably lawsuits coming there, and maybe expediting a departure for all these teams from Bridgeview. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch. There's a lot of stadium discussion in Chicago sports. Chicago loves a winner, though, like any city. And if the Fire want to go from being largely an afterthought to a focal point, which I alluded to the Mexican community specifically earlier, but if you just talk about the number of soccer fans in this city, particularly due to the diversity of immigrant cultures, be it from Mexico, be it from Poland, be it from Germany, be it from Ukraine, or just elsewhere around the world, an increasing Central and South American population, there are so many soccer fans in this city. And so the potential is there. The phrase sleeping giant has been overused, in my opinion. But again, if this team were to put a winner on the field, they could flex their muscles a bit. I mean, they have the financial ability. They've shown that. If the team on the field wins, there's something to be had there. But right now they're kind of just stuck in this mixture of really dedicated Fire fans, of a percentage of Chicago's casual soccer fans, and a lot of tickets being given away for not necessarily free, but on lower prices or in group tickets. And that's doing okay right now. But yeah, to raise the ceiling, the soccer just has to get better. And it's honestly hard to believe that in a league where you can kind of roll the dice every year on the standings, that the Fire have been so consistent in where they've been in the table.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been to Bridgeview a bunch of times. I went to Soldier Field last year for a TFC away game, so I've been to both.
Chicago.
I love it. Chicago's my favorite U.S. city. So, I've been to both. Obviously, traveling from downtown to Bridgeview is not the funnest thing to do.
No public transit access, which is just
well, yeah, we have to rent a school
really
bus.
shocking. Especially when you consider how large the radius of Chicago's transit is, the fact that it does not get there. And yeah, so it's, as I mentioned, this week has kind of been a reminder of, that deal sucked. And in hindsight, no one but the city of Bridgeview, who got a lot of money out of it, really are thrilled about it. And yeah, again, and now it's just in its final hours, that lease is, reminding everybody just how silly it is.
Fair. Though I was there for the 2017 away game, TFC Chicago. That was for top of the Shield standing game. What a game that was.
Yeah,
at least from a TFC fan perspective, it was great.
TFC team on its way up, what would become that 2018, one of the greatest teams in MLS history team. And then you got the Fire at, again, the only time they've been any good in recent memory. The Nemanja Nikolic season, Bastian Schweinsteiger, that whole crew.
Yeah, that was a fun time and a fun a trip, I think, for everybody. A question we always ask as well. So we always ask that context question, but I always want to also understand perceptions of Toronto FC and what the fan base's perception of Toronto FC is. I think, again, in Toronto, sometimes we get kind of in our bubble in terms of what's happening here, and don't really have a perception of what the rest of the league thinks of the team. But I just want to get an idea of what you think, Fire fans, maybe even the organization, if you have that kind of insight, would think about Toronto FC as a whole. And this is a question I always steal from Mike Singh, so I credit him for coming up with this one. But do you think Toronto FC is a big club within MLS?
I think in the grand scheme, absolutely. TFC is a big club. Obviously, I alluded to the fact that the Fire have been consistently so poor on the field, and they're a team that the whole league gets to look at and ask, what the hell is wrong with you guys? I think TFC, though, this is one of the few teams Fire fans can turn around and be like, we stink, but, and that's what it is. But I think there's questions about what happened to TFC. I think a lot of the league has those questions, though. I don't think Fire fans are unique because, again, we remember that 2018 team. We've seen the crowds that turn out for Canadians men's national team games at that stadium. Again, the pedigree of the guys who've played there, and the years that guys like Josie Altidore and Michael Bradley gave to that TFC team. Again, that's still so recent in the memory, and people have those thoughts. So, Toronto, it's been a lot of I think we in Chicago see ourselves in the mirror as here's a team with lots of money, willing to spend said money, and for whatever reason, throwing money at the problem doesn't seem to be working. Obviously, you guys are having a better year this year. You talk about last year's issues with just not being able to keep everybody on the field at the same time. But I think at this point, I think the view of TFC is curiosity, because to your point, if Insigne is on the field and TFC can have at least most of the rest of the supporting cast out there, they're a dangerous team because Insigne is a match winner, because you've got some really solid building blocks and guys like Sean Johnson in goal and Osorio in midfield and Bernadeschi playing back to, rolling back the years a bit. I think there's no doubt about TFC's on-field potential, but I'll be honest, I have no idea what we're going to see on Saturday. Maybe you guys don't even know what we're going to see on Saturday, because the combination of, Insigne is back, which is great, but a bunch of other things are missing. I remember seeing, kind of checking on the MLS scores from the last match day and seeing that Toronto versus DC United line on FOTMob and just asking myself, what on earth happened here?
Don't worry. Everyone else asks what on earth happened here.
And so like the 90-second minute. Like the game, the stats and the play-by-play of it. It's like, what on earth? So yeah, I think everybody, Chicago included, has just kind of been scratching their heads at TFC because, on the one hand, this is a team a couple years removed from a wooden spoon, and we in Chicago are not going to, are not going to laugh at that too strongly, because we know the position our team has been in recent years. But, there's days Toronto looks like the best team in the league, and there's days they look like the worst team in the league. And, I don't know the team well enough to, have much more of a view than that of just, I'm intrigued by TFC. Obviously, it feels like things have bottomed out and are rising up. So I think it's just honestly going to be interesting to see where Toronto FC goes in the coming years. Because obviously there's this window where, even if Insigne and Bernadeschi can stay healthy and on the field and unsuspended, those guys aren't getting any younger. And so, obviously this era is finite. So I think, as just an MLS observer, what I'm going to be really curious to see is, assuming things generally continue to get, ostensibly better, when TFC has to move into that new era, how do they avoid making the same mistakes that were made when they went from the Bradley and Bradley era to whatever you guys think of what happened 2 years ago?
Oh, that is a whole other podcast, Alex. It's a whole other podcast. But look, I think, unless Mike, you had any other follow-ups for Alex, I think, thank you so much for all of that insight. I think that gives our listeners and our viewers a lot of sort of contextual insight into Chicago Fire. Again, as you're curious about us, I think TFC fans are also curious about Chicago. As, again, I don't want to use that sleeping giant kind of analogy, but in a lot of ways, I think a lot of people think that, and that thought is here in Chicago, or here in Toronto, excuse me. Thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate your time. Tell the good listeners and the good folks where they can find you in terms of your work and also the podcast as well.
Yeah, so you can find me on socials, Twitter, Instagram, etc. at A Campbell Sports. I, as you mentioned, host the CHGO Fire Podcast. We currently record every other Tuesday. Next one will be this coming Tuesday after the Chicago against Toronto game. And obviously, you guys are Toronto fans, but I'm excited that you actually will be able to hear me on a version of the broadcast this weekend. It's kind of a late fill-in, but I'll be filling in on color commentary on the away radio call on Saturday. So for those familiar with Apple TV, that's an option that you can adjust your audio. You know, again, I wouldn't expect TFC fans to listen to a Chicago Fire angle to the game necessarily, but yeah, that's where you can find me this weekend.
All right. Well, TFC fans, if you want a different perspective, because look, Apple's great. This is just my personal opinion. Apple, in terms of commentary, actually has been okay, but it is a bit different when you do get a broadcast team that just travels around and doesn't, isn't with the team all the time. And as a fan, you always want those kind of insights. But it would be good to have somebody who has insight, at least on the Fire, and that would be great in terms of how that plays along with TFC. I think we'll wrap it up, and we'll wrap the show there. Thank you, everybody, for listening to another Toronto Till I Die / Who Are You mashup episode. We really appreciate it, of course. Follow us on Instagram. If you haven't already, you can follow us at TTID Show, or search Toronto Till I Die to find us. And if you haven't already, subscribe on YouTube, leave 5-star rating if you're listening to this on podcast version. Leave a comment. Jeff loves them. Our co-host that's not on the show today, but he loves reading them. It makes his soul feel good. For Michael Singh and for Alex Campbell, our special guest, I'm Mike Newell. We'll see you next week, everybody. Cheers.
And wait, and baby, I'm TFC till I die.